So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our session entitled Fighting Climate Change with Technical Innovation. We will be discussing new innovative techniques or innovative techniques already known with some added perspectives or aspects in order to fight climate change. First, allow me to thank the organizing committee for giving me the opportunity to moderate this panel. I'm so happy to be here with you. I would love to mention that this event was decided to be online even before COVID pandemic in order to fight the climate change and for a better climate justice. We're a bit avant-garde in order to work all together to push things forward. I'm happy to welcome among us our speakers for today. So we will start, there's a bit change in the program. We will start with Louise Wagner, and then we will proceed with Christian, and finally with Adrian, hopefully, who would be able to join us then. So our first speaker is Louise Wagner, who is currently doing her MA in sociology at the Friedrich-Schiller-University of Jena, Germany, and working as a research assistant for the research group Bioinequalities, so bioeconomy and inequalities. She is also a beneficiary of the honors program for future researcher at the University of Jena, in the context of which she is researching into different perspectives on geoengineering articulated by social scientists and the humanities scholars. Louise will be presenting for us why clutching our pearls is a precious practice when it comes to geoengineering. Louise, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll first share my screen with you and give you the presentation, but really don't concentrate too much on the presentation because there won't be any slides.
We can see the slides, yes.
Like this, you should be able to see it now. You can see it full screen now, probably, no?
We have, your voice is a bit...
okay, like this, it's better?
Yes, it's better.
Perfect.
We can hear you better, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so let me start. I will start by telling you a bit what the presentation is about and what it's also not about. So my aim is not to give you a detailed overview of each technological project that is discussed under the umbrella term of geoengineering, and also not to talk in detail about all the fallacies and risks that are involved with each and every one of these technologies, because that work has been done by others. So in other terms, I will not speak about geoengineering with a minor G. But what I want to talk about is an emergent pro-geoengineering discourse that is emerging in the social sciences. So in other words, I will talk about geoengineering with a capital G. But still, an operational definition of what we're actually talking about is a good place to start a presentation. So let me start there. The term geoengineering refers to a body of large scale. And when I say large scale, then think big, think bigger, go beyond that, and then you might touch the toes of geoengineering. So the large scale technologies and infrastructures that intervene in the processes of ecosystems on a planetary scale with the intention to reverse or at least slow down the rise of global temperatures. You usually find three different categories of modes of interventions. The first one is carbon dioxide removal. The idea is to remove carbon dioxide. One idea is to remove CO2 from the size of production where it is actually produced or emitted. So it means to capture the gas, transform it into a liquid, and then store it underground, or you use it to pump up more oil and gas that otherwise would be too difficult, or in other words, too costly to access otherwise by the oil or the fossil fuel companies. And this is what is called enhanced oil recovery, and that has been done since the 70s with the captured CO2, and that is what some of you might know as CCS, or carbon capture and storage. The second mode of intervention is solar radiation management, and there the idea is basically to increase the amount of sunlight that is being reflected back into space, or reducing the amount of sunlight entering the atmosphere. And the most prominent example is a sulfur aerosol injection, which is a terrible word to pronounce, but it means that sulfur dioxide is emitted into the stratosphere because it has the opposite effect of CO2. So it does not trap, but it reflects sunlight. The main source of sulfur dioxide, of course, is the combustion of fossil fuels. And SO2, so sulfur dioxide, is also the main source of ozone layer depletion and acid rain. So the third mode of intervention that you might be familiar with is weather modification, which is pretty self-explanatory. It aims predominantly at changing rain patterns and the formation of clouds. Until quite recently, geoengineering hadn't been much of an issue in the humanities, and if so, it was vehemently rejected as just another capitalist strategy of distraction from actual solution to climate change. And this situation is changing. So you can observe a rise in progressives, and I might be tempted to call them leftist social scientists, or they claim themselves to be leftist social scientists, who are becoming actually proponents of geoengineering. And they're pushing for its integration into a left vision of the future. And I have tried to put their arguments into 5 main categories. How they argue in favor of geoengineering. So the first one is pragmatism, and the idea is very simple. They just say it's a realistic option. So let's face it, politics won't do anything meaningful anytime soon. The entanglement with fossil fuel industry is just too big. So geoengineering is the only option that we can actually hope and ask for. And the baseline for this argument really is political despair and desperation. And we can also add really a lack of imagination as well, in a way. Following the same line, pragmatism also produces the argument of extreme circumstances demand extreme responses. So we are in a situation of emergency, and so there is no time to just argue over so-called details. This is the position advocated by socialist science fiction writer Kim Stanley Robinson. And I would just want to give you a brief visualization of what the scale of these so-called details are actually are, and what that we ideologically rigid leftists are quote unquote clutching our pearls about. A quote by the same author that you can find in an interview done for the Jacobin magazine. So the scale of the infrastructure needed to filter CO2 from the atmosphere and transport it to the sites where it could be stored in relevant amounts is of the same scale as the fossil fuel infrastructure that is in place today. And these infrastructures need to be built on land, on and with which people live. And this is just not some kind of terra nullius that is just awaiting the geoengineering conquests. And this is just, so CCS is just one of more than 10 such large scale interventions, right? So it's not really details that we are speaking about. The interesting thing now about this kind of argument is, I think, if we recognize, which I guess we do, the urgency of the situation, and I forgot to put the slide, so we are here, pragmatism. Why waste time on plan B? Or as Gopal Dayanini has put it, I quote him, urgency should not enable desperation, because desperation enables false solutions. The situation is so urgent that we have neither time, resources, energy, or political will that we can afford to waste on things that are speculative, that have the high potential to exacerbate the crisis, and that don't actually get to the root cause of the problem. Okay, so now related to the first category is the second category, it's safety concerns. And in Holly Jean Buck's perspective, carbon that is stored underground is simply safer than carbon that is out in the atmosphere. And the fantasy of geoengineering as a utopia heavily relies on this illusion of a stable and therefore safe climate, whereby stable and safe, of course, imply human control. Geoengineering as a security measure is also assumed to buy time. The problem is that this argument is perfectly compatible with the logic of the treadmill of production. So that means you add another infrastructural layer to fix an urgent symptom, and thereby creating new problems that will need fixing later on. Attached to this argument is also that geoengineering will enable humanity to survive without climate change disaster. Now, Kyle Wilde, boiled the core fallacy of this argument quite to the essence. I quote him, What I think is ironic about a lot of geoengineering discourses is that the current situation that geoengineering is trying to preserve or save is actually a dystopia for some people. Members of dominant populations are trying to avoid their dystopia by preserving our dystopia. The third category of arguments are labor-related arguments. So the saying goes, there will be green jobs, and since these will be ecologically and socially meaningful, workers will no longer be alienated and will be given the opportunity to do effective labor. Working as a geoengineer is in fact repeatedly being referred to or portrayed as doing care work. So it's referred to as an intervention with an ethos of care, as a mode of caring for the biosphere, or as a way to engage in a caring relationship or build a caring relationship between humans and nature. There are also proponents who argue in the line of neo-extractivist ideas. That means that the profits from these industries could be invested in social and public services. The issue here is that this argument really ignores the fact that this strategy entrenches the governmental funds, the dependency of governmental funds vis-a-vis industrial actors, with the result that the well-being of workers and of citizens heavily relies on profit-oriented extractivism. So basically, no profit, no social services. The fourth category of arguments, I call it staying ahead of the pack. This is the position advocated by Peter Fraze. It simply says, we as social scientists, or as leftist people, we should do the science before they do, and whereby they refers to corporations or corporate affiliated scientists. The idea is basically that progressives should appropriate the master's tools so that we will not be left behind, and at least will have a say at how the technologies are going to be implemented and by whom. And maybe it's just enough at this to this point to be reminded of the famous Audre Lorde's famous sentences from 1979, if I'm not mistaken. I quote her: "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never allow us to bring about genuine change." And the last category is recognition of historical responsibility or decolonization, or geoengineering as a means of decolonization. This is the position that Holly Jean Buck is advocating. She says, I quote her, "Morally, rich countries have an imperative to develop this technology and use it in order to reduce climate risk for everybody." Now, besides the fact that researchers really do their utmost best to prove that geoengineering actually will increase climate risk, and also not, of course, for everybody in the same amounts, let me just ask you what it says about this argument, that it is the people to whom Holly Jean Buck wants the global north, or the so-called global north, to pay their dues to, are in fact the same people who oppose geoengineering the most. And I hope you can forgive me here if I make use of a strategic essentialism to make my point. But the strongest counterpunches against geoengineering come from Latinx, Indigenous, and scholars of color, such as Kyle White, Sylvia Ribeiro, Tom Goldtooth, Ruth Nyambura, and I'm sure many others. And signatories of the Hands of Mother Earth manifesto, which is basically really a manifesto against geoengineering, include the World Indigenous Women's Alliance, Focus on Global South, Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development, among many other organizations and individuals, predominantly from the so-called Global South. Okay, so to end this presentation, I think that the image of the oyster really helps us to make the choices that we have confronted with geoengineering very clear. So either we clutch our pearls, acknowledge the moral, ecological, and social abysses of geoengineering and prevent it from entering the shell, or we see it as a potentially harmful grain of sand and try to make a pretty shiny pearl out of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louise. I can see that there are no questions written down in the Q&A section. So if anyone has a question, a comment to share, please feel free to write it down in the Q&A section. Now, Louise, I have a question. So when it comes to maybe legislations and legal standards or legal norms in regards to geoengineering, do we see like a bit of heterogeneity among countries, or it's coherent and common mostly to different countries or different cultures or different communities?
I'm not muted, right? You can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. So just let me briefly ask so that I get the question. What do you mean by legalities, and what people are trying?
So do we have like some legislations precising or dictating what is right, what is wrong, ethically, or from an environmental perspective, ecological perspective?
Mm-hmm. Well, there exists actually a moratorium against geoengineering or different forms of geoengineering on the basis of the UN, I think, the United Nations. But that is being violated, especially by corporations and also by individuals. I think the most prominent example is the Haida Gwaii salmon restoration ocean fertilization experiment, where 100 tons of iron were being dumped in the ocean. So this moratorium is regularly being violated. Yeah, and there are also countries, of course, also pushing for a stronger moratorium and a ban on all experiments and free air experiments, I think it's called, of geoengineering. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I hope I'm pronouncing names correctly. So we have a participant, Mihir Sharma, who is asking, what does this clutching of the pearls regarding geoengineering reveal about the left in the global north more generally? Or what can the left in the global north not see or think?
Well, I think the clutching of the pearls is actually, I would say it's actually a good thing to do, because it refers to the fact that we are aware of the morally perverted dimension of geoengineering, so to say. So my aim was a bit to reappropriate this this kind of also very sexist saying, to say that in this case it's actually a good thing to do so. But what it really reveals, the other side, the attempt to make a pretty shiny pearl out of geoengineering, that actually I think reveals the fact that yeah, we are trying to evade the actual questions. And I think also this political despair is also very common among leftists in the global north, and that it's actually also time for us to reimagine, to become creative in a way that won't change dramatically and for the worse the climate and the environments that we are living in and our relations to each other and to our surroundings, and to reimagine what that could be without just destroying everything, so that the underlying structures can remain the same.
Okay.
I think it reveals a lot of things. I think it's also an attempt to build kind of epistemic monocultures in a way, to just marginalize what is called like different perspectives on climate justice. So yeah, it reveals a lot of things, I think.
Okay. I hope this answered pretty much your question, Meir. And I would like to thank you again, Louise. We will proceed now to our second speaker, Adrian. I have just a new message, so he's, oh yeah, thank you. It did the job. So now we are happy to welcome among us Adrian Lasimbang. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. So, who is from the Kadazan Duzon Indigenous People of Sabah, Malaysia. Adrian is currently a member of the Malaysian Senate and at the same time active in renewable energy development in indigenous areas in Sabah, Malaysia, of course. He is the former executive director of Tonibong, a non-profit organization spearheading and designing community-led micro-hydro systems in the remote indigenous villages in the Malaysian states of Sarawak and Sabah on the island of Borneo. He is also a technical advisor for Indigenous People Network of Malaysia. He is awarded the Ecology Prize for Indigenous Conservationist of the Year for protecting watershed areas and improving livelihoods in rural indigenous communities in Borneo. Adrian has twice received the Outstanding Young Person Sabah Award for his work integrating natural resource management and rural indigenous communities. He also runs Penampang Renewable Energy, a renewable energy consultancy company. Adrian, we are so happy to have you today. And Adrian will be presenting Indigenous People's Innovative Renewable Energy Solutions. Adrian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Zeina. Can I share my screen for my slide?
Yes, of course. I will just mention that we have another question from Philip to Louise. So I think we will leave it in the window, and you can, Louise, you can answer it right after Adrian's presentation. Okay, sorry, Philip, I didn't see it earlier. Adrian, please go ahead.
Can I share screen?
I think
yes,
you, Louise, need to share your screen. Yeah.
Okay.
And now you should be able to share your screen, Adrian.
Sorry, I hope it works.
Yeah. Can you see my screen now? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Zeina, for the very introduction, and thank you very much for having me, and also giving the opportunity to share some of our experiences in Sabah Borneo with regards to indigenous people's initiative in terms of promoting renewable energy, especially in lighting up very remote rural villages in Sabah Borneo. So just for information, before I proceed, I'm also part of this Indigenous Peoples Major Group on Sustainable Development, IPMG, in the UN SDG. And we have been doing a lot of programs with regards to technology transfer and trying to promote more renewable energy adaptation amongst indigenous peoples, and also trying to push for more renewable energy oriented renewable rural electrification programs in Malaysia. So in this program, I would like to just focus on our programs on microhydro, even though we do a lot of other appropriate technologies for this matter for discussion. Just a brief introduction about my organization, Tonibung. We basically, Tonibung is a, it derives from the word Friends for Village Development, and based on it's self-explanatory, where we are empower, our main role is to actually look at how we can empower especially our rural youths in terms of mastering and also embracing renewable energy and other appropriate technologies such as solar, solar thermal, biogas, biomass, and so on for development in their rural areas. So our organization have been incorporated or have established since 1999. It's already more than about 20 years, but we have been focusing very much on village scale or community-based projects in Sabah and Malaysia as a whole. So our main focus is actually to look at how are we going to be able to provide access to affordable, clean water and also clean electricity. And all of this are looking at appropriate technologies such as renewable energy and other sustainable solutions. So you can see in our photos that we are looking at developing indigenous developed technologies. We don't want to continue having relying on foreign technology and also very high-tech technologies. So we're trying to make sure that they are able to be mastered by local communities and themselves can master this technology without relying too much on foreign technologies, and very expensive equipment. So those are our main objectives. And of course, as an organization that is also very much believe in sustainable development, we really looking at how we can assist on achieving the SDG targets. And we focus on goal 7, which is trying to find what are the approaches or technologies that can provide affordable and clean energy, especially for rural indigenous people in our region. We are also looking at how we can tie in climate change towards our work. Yeah, so most of you may know Borneo is a very a big island, but we also have a lot of issues related to activities, especially like logging and large-scale palm oil plantation expansion and so on. But there are many communities are still living very remote in the jungles of Borneo. So we're trying to see what are the solutions instead of using fossil fuel-based technology like diesel or petrol generators. We try to look at how we can utilize natural resources such as running water and also water to provide the requirement for the community, especially in rural electrification. So our mission is to reaching out the deep. So our goal is to go for the deepest first, the furthest first, then we gradually go out and have a meeting point, because I know that there are governments or other NGOs also doing this as we speak, but not many of the NGOs go for the furthest or the most remote of communities. So that's why we have looked at focusing on those isolated communities as our main target. So Tony Bong actually runs a center called CREATE, Center for Renewable Energy and Appropriate Technologies. So this center provides not just the access to the technology, but also try to develop more human capital, more community technicians to be able to survey, design, install, and also operate those systems so it can run sustainably, and they don't rely so much on the organization or just government assistance. Yeah, so we do a lot of trainings and also research and development in terms of developing all these affordable system. For example, one of our approach is to look at how we can use waste materials such as aluminum cans and so on to produce some of these turbines. So this is our center. You can see it's run on solar and bamboo and so on, but we are also looking at technology that is able to be done by the community locally, and we fabricate these turbines locally, and we make it available for communities that wants to develop the micro hydro systems. The other things that we try to look at how to use waste materials such as plastics, and plastics is a big problem these days, and one of our approaches is to actually try to produce all these small hydro turbines using plastic materials, especially like HDPEs, and we can produce this spoon. Like here, I can hold one of these. It's actually made through injection molding, and we can recycle all these plastics to make turbine that is cheap and can be installed by the community themselves locally. Apart from that, we also use aluminum. A lot of aluminum is being discarded, but we try to produce also aluminum runner. For example, we smelt those aluminum and make it into turbine parts, and these parts can turn into hydro turbines that can generate power for the communities. So we also encourage the communities not to waste the materials. So they can also create some sort of small businesses in selling those spare parts and so on. So our center actually provides this training for our local youths to do. Apart from that, we are trying to look at different ways of making the turbines more affordable, and one of the biggest challenges is actually logistics, to go to very deep jungles of Borneo and some of these communities, because there's no roads, or sometimes we have to carry everything on our backs, or we have to charter a helicopter to send some of these. So one of the approach we try to do is also to use concrete turbines, and so that those turbines or the components can be casted on site, so that we don't have to carry all those equipment. So those are some of the few, innovations that we try to introduce to cater for the demand of the communities, so that there's much more interest on renewable energy. It's easier to buy generators on the shops and compared to doing this, but when we try to develop these technologies, small turbines, it can basically give the community direct benefits from technology, and in the same time we eliminate the use of more fossil fuel in the communities. If you look at it, maybe one village is maybe small, but if you do it in a lot of communities, actually the amount of fossil fuel displaced from these small generators, diesel generators, is quite huge if you look at it in a bigger scale. And the other things is we also use this system as a incentive for the community to protect the watershed. I can just show you some of these photos, but the next point I want to make here is the community-based model. How do we get the communities to be involved in all the process of implementation, from planning until to the end of the project, and also how to make sure that management of the system can be sustained over time. So we have to do a lot of community organizing, and also what we call monitoring and follow-up for the communities. But we have trained a lot of our local youths to do this for us. So it means that we can do, the more people know about the technology, the greater, or the more community that we can benefit from this program. And one of the things that I think is very important is this community-based microhydro system, or community-based renewable energy, any projects, is basically social engineering. Is to change the mindset of the people, because in our country we are so used to government handouts. So every time when we talk about rural electrification, the government give out a lot of free generators, and because of this, they also give subsidy fuel. So it continues the business as usual of using fossil fuel for electrification. So with introducing cheaper and also simpler technology, which the community can master, then they don't need to buy fuel anymore. And I think it's very important to show that the community have the ability to run those systems and to sustain it over time. And the last point I want to make here is, apart from community-based participation, I think the biggest benefit of doing micro-hydro system is we tie it in with forest management, because for communities to have sustainable operations of the micro-hydro system, they have to protect the watershed, because if there's damage in the watershed, I think the flow of river will be reduced or damaged. And now with climate change, there's a lot of issue about drought and so on. But a good watershed can actually sustain the flow of water better compared to a disturbed forest. So in our microhydro system, we always integrate watershed conservation in the management of the system. So it's basically like it's like a what they call incentive for the community to have this project. In return, they will protect. So for example, in this area, we have all these kampong villages that had already their microhydro. So this area as mapped here are actually protected watersheds. Means that nobody can enter or even do any farming in these areas, because everybody knows that this is their fuel tank, you know. So something that the community can work together, benefit together for having the 24 hours clean energy. So you can see that in the larger scale, even though if you look at it, small communities, but if you have so many communities around there and having microhydros, you can see that these red areas are all the areas that is already currently conserved by the community as watershed. So it means that we have better protection apart from, on top of what already the government have, like protected area, forest reserve. The community also have ability to basically declare that area as watershed protection. So it gives just not just provide the community with green energy, but also help in terms of forest conservation. And as doing microhydro, one of the important part is also productive end use. And we have seen that a lot of the energy provided by the microhydro system is only used for lights. So, but we're trying to see how we can benefit more, especially the women in the community. So with energy, we can do a lot of things. For example, like now we have freezer, and with refrigeration, they can store their food fresh, or they can also do small businesses by making like frozen food, so that they can sell it in the town. Before having electricity or 24-hour electricity, they have to hunt a lot. They have to hunt every day, or to go to fish every day, because they have no means of preserving the fish or meat from the jungle. So with electricity, they can have option to hunt less, because they can keep the food fresh. So I think the last sharing, I think, is looking at the challenges. So of course, serving this community is not easy, very remote, and you can see these are the kind of roads that we have to deal with. Sometimes we have to use the long boats and so on. But the most important is actually the things that really keep us going is actually how fulfilling and recharging it when you are working in actually the most pristine part of the world. So these are some of the things that we continue to do. So I hope that's all I can share for now. If there's any question, I am happy to take questions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Adrian, for this amazing work you are conducting, not only on an environmental level, but also creating job opportunities and empowering your local community. This is great. Before opening the floor for a discussion with Adrian, I would like Louise, if possible, to quickly answer, if possible, the Philip's question. So do you think that established understandings on geoengineering, also in the left, that predominate in the global north, are a sign of lacking awareness or willingness to deal with the possibility that climate justice necessarily requires decolonization?
So the easy answer is yes. But I would say, I think it's interesting that you mentioned both awareness and willingness, and I would change the or with the and. I think it's showing both, and I think we could also distinguish between both of them. So there are the positions where you can really see that there's a lack of willingness to deal with the historical and the present, with history and the present. Sorry. Where geoengineering is just easier. It's just easier to do. in a way. Yeah, a means to change everything so that nothing really has to change. But there's also the lack of awareness, yes, that necessarily requires decolonization as well. And I think this is why Holly Jean Bach's position is so dangerous, because she actually gives those, by establishing geoengineering or a discourse on geoengineering as a means of decolonization, she gives those lacking the willingness, actually, like how do you call it, the means to think that they are right, like, okay, so we don't have to engage with all these things because there's geoengineering, and those lacking awareness, she gives an option to them to deal with that with that problems, but in a very wrong way, by saying, well, there you have your means of decolonization, you have to raise the awareness, and there you go, you do geoengineering and then you do decolonization. So I think her position is a really, really dangerous one that we have to be aware of. So yes, it's both.
Okay, thank you, Louise, and thank you, Philip, for raising this question. I will open now the floor for discussion with Adrian, starting with Avia's question. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. So she is asking, Adrian, if you have mentioned to use 3D printing technologies, like melting recycled plastics to make your own filament for building micropower systems.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, we tried to use 3D printing, but unfortunately, the material is not strong enough to turn it into a turbine or component of blade. For example, the spoon for the Sturgo turbine. We have tried it, but it's not strong enough. But we have done a lot of this. In fact, this component, the master template, was made using a 3D print as the template, and then we did the aluminum mold for the injection molding, but the material for to do 3D is not strong enough. We had tried it before. We also tried to experiment with different materials, for example, like aluminum. This aluminum, a lot of the aluminums that we use, like beer cans and all these things, are not too strong enough. So what we do with other to make it stronger, we try to look at other discarded aluminum alloy. Normally, you go to the scrapyard, you can find a lot of things like car rims and this just thrown away. So those are some of the things that we try to do because unfortunately, the amount of torque or the strength of the water we are dealing with is quite high. So plastic is not really the most durable material to do, but because we are doing this for smaller units, like so that is affordable. We do it for like a household unit. If we want to do it for the whole village, it has to be a different type of materials. So I think hopefully answers your question.
Thank you, Adrian. In fact, you have two more questions in the Q&A section from Philip and from Henry. So if it would be possible for you to type the answers so we can proceed directly with Chris in order to respect timeline. And if we do have some extra time at the end, we can open always the floor for discussion, for a live discussion. Okay, thank you again, Adrian. And now we welcome our third speaker, Christian Hauenstein, who is a research associate and a PhD student at TU Berlin since 2018, where he is part of the junior research group CoalExit. Furthermore, he is guest researcher at the German Institute for Economic Research, also since 2018. Christian focuses mainly on the following principal fields of activities, such as interdisciplinary quantitative and qualitative research, modeling and analyzing the international steam coal markets, studying socio-ecological transformation of energy systems, and the phase out of fossil fuels. So, Christian, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this kind introduction. I'll share my screen. and hope you see the slide now. Okay, so this actually adds quite nicely to Louise's presentation, I would say. This is based on joint work with Isabel Braunger, and we published a paper with this title, How Incumbent Cultural and Cognitive Path Dependencies Constrain a Scenario Cone, Reliance on Carbon Dioxide Removal Due to Techno-bias. And well, this was initiated by discussions also within our group, where we were wondering why do most mitigation paths focus so much on technological solutions, and there's very little about also demand side. And that does not only include technological efficiencies or I myself reducing energy consumption, but rather societal changes as well, also looking at the economic system, etc. Taking the example of the 1.5 degree pathways, as they were also included in the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees, we see here on the left side that there's also in almost all pathways a substantial amount of the so-called negative emissions. And well, this comparing to Louise's presentation, not so much include the geoengineering in the sense of like putting aerosols in space or anything, but rather it's mostly biomass and carbon capture, transport and storage, or afforestation and reforestation, what's meant here mostly. But arguments, I guess, are valid for in both discussions as well. Well, issues with carbon dioxide removal, here on the right, just I won't go through all of it, but so far it's just technological feasibility is not proven. There are some carbon and capture, transport and storage facilities, but mostly not large scale so far. They don't run very well. They have economic issues. And so far, as Louise already said, it's mostly connected to enhanced oil recovery. So the question is, what about climate change and mitigation? Furthermore, of course, it might be this ethical dilemma. What if we mitigate climate change, but not today, but rather postpone action to the second half of the century or even further? Who bears the risks for this? Because we all know climate change is happening already today and has massive adverse effects, but mostly in the global south, not so much in countries of the global north. And of course, most of these debates about carbon dioxide removal, etc., are in the global north. So yeah, this might be another issue to look at. So who bears the risk? Who discusses these options, etc. Well, what's not included so far are demand side solutions. Very much in the new assessment report, IPCC assessment report, there's going to be a chapter on demand side as well. So looking forward to see more on that, but so far there's very limited attention to it. And so we were wondering how does that come, because to our understanding, it's not that carbon dioxide removal technologies have proven as the best solutions or anything, but are rather some distant visions. And this we call techno-bias now in these scenarios, this focus on technological solutions without this scientific basis for it. Well, what might be reasons for it could be that it's just easier to model, you can easily come up with assumptions on costs and potentials, etc., for these technologies and implement them in the models. It's a lot harder to put numbers on how societal changes affect the demand side and to explicitly state that. And of course, as also Louise already mentioned, there are incumbent interests. So these might be reasons, but why are in this scientific world, especially also, why are the scenario cones so limited and do not include much on the demand side? We think these reasons are not enough to explain that, but rather we see that cognitive and cultural path dependencies might play a role as well. And therefore, we did look at this from different perspectives and find quite interesting literature on dualisms, which are part or discussed a lot in feminist theory, for example, by Keller, Harding, or Plumwood. And they are essential parts of modern Western thinking. And one dualism is this human nature dualism. And it's just the idea, well, we as the human race are distinct from nature, and because due to our mental abilities, we are meant to control nature. Looking at that a bit more explicitly, there are different types or characteristics of dualisms here from Plumwood: hierarchization, radical demarcation, homogenization, and backgrounding. And looking at these characteristics in this topic of mitigation scenarios, we see that it's reflected in that. For example, by just this idea of controlling a CO2 concentration and thereby dealing or solving this problem of climate change. Now, zooming in on specific measures like control by technological solutions such as carbon dioxide removal, or on the other hand, responses to climate change, to problems that are not just easily resolvable, but would or could require also changes in society, etc., to our system, which we are part of and not where we are external to. We see that there's this male association with everything that's about control, and female associated responses, which are connotated with passivity or submersion. And so we see here a reason why there might be these technological based solutions seen as very powerful and possibly overvalued, versus behavioral changes within our society, and that these changes might be underrated and they're potentially just not seen so much in this debate because they are associated with a female aspect or female characteristics in our patriarchal Western society. I don't want to say that it's about bringing more female researchers, anything in the field. It's a lot more. It's this thinking patterns that need to be overcome. And yeah, so I would end here. I think I have one more slide about widening the scenario cone, but these are, I think I did talk about most of that, and it's we already some of it was already mentioned in the discussion before. So thank you for your attention, and yeah, happy to discuss this issue further with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Christian. And I would like to thank Adrian also for answering all the attendees' questions in the answered section. So any comments, any questions to Christian?
I think Louise has one.
Yes, but yeah, I thought that we could like leave Louise to open the discussion a bit in a professional way with Christian. Please, Louise, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'd have two comments. The one is, sorry, microphone. So the one is when you mentioned the dualist part, there's also a very interesting book by a French philosopher who's called Friedrich-Schiller, and he has analyzed this this relationship between, or this underlying understanding of sustainability that is being reproduced in these techno fixes scenarios. And he actually says that you can also you can observe a shift away from this dualist understanding, and more of that these techno fixes are kind of a mirror stage of the Anthropocene, where there's a shift in a complete away from dualism towards an acknowledgement of complete conflation between humans and nature. So in this deconstructivist way of thinking, that you say, well, we are doing it anyways, and we have been doing it anyways, and we are entangled with all these processes, so we might also just continue. So it's not only the dualist part, but it's also, you can see a shift away from the dualism towards an absolute idea of absolute conflation, and you might just continue doing that. And the other thing, because you raised the question yourself in the presentation about the reasons there, like why is this reasons for this techno-bias and the economic reasons. And I think a good way to approach this, and or the the approach at least that I find very helpful, is an infrastructural perspective, because what it means, it's not only just prolonging the era of fossil fuels, because you can use the CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, or use the captured sulfur dioxide to spray in the atmosphere, and thereby recreating a legitimacy for a dying industry. But there's also a very economic necessity for it, because what it means for fossil capitalists, if the fossil infrastructure becomes obsolete more or less overnight, it means an absolute crisis of devaluation. There's a lot of capital fixed in these infrastructures, so if they are becoming obsolete overnight, they lose a lot of money. So they have, so it's not only about prolonging the system and establishing new markets for sulfur acid and for CO2 and so on, but also really to save their infrastructure from devaluation, and also a crisis, and also a looming crisis of overaccumulation if this infrastructure becomes obsolete.
Yeah, thanks for these comments, and I guess you're completely right that this extractivist and capitalist structure is a major reason for it. However, I think if you look at scientific debates, it's the question. So of course we are all part of this society, and are limited by our ideas we get from the society. However, the question is, are we as scientific community, and well, I would also say, like, well, there are different scientific communities, but this Western and dominated community here in Germany and Europe, also of course United States, etc. Are we blind to other approaches, and why are we blind? Is that because we all corrupted and we all just part of this capitalist thinking, or are there other reasons for it as well? And I guess that's what we try to work out here a little bit. It's probably more than just this capitalist thinking that brings us to, if I talk to people in my research group, and we're quite interdisciplinary and quite open to many debates, but it's a lot easier to imagine, well, there's this new technology, prices are falling at some point, and then we'll just implement them, and we will solve all the issues we'll have with biodiversity loss, etc., and negative adverse impacts, and somehow bring down atmospheric CO2 concentration. And it's a lot harder to imagine drastic changes in society. But why not? I mean, we've seen that in this COVID pandemic a lot, that changes can happen quite fast, but we have to start imagining them as well. We have to start to think about them, and otherwise we won't have those ideas. So I'll leave it with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Christian. I still see that there's one additional question from Philip to Adrian, I guess, if I'm not mistaken. So Philip, please, would you write down, would you mention the speaker you are addressing for the initiative in order for the speaker to reply to you, so to reply. And if there are no further questions from the attendees or comments, I would like to thank all the speakers for the great work you are doing, the great efforts. Solving climate change requires work from all of us and in an integrated pluridisciplinary approach. So thank you again. And before giving the floor to Catherine, who will be explaining about the coffee break options, I would like to thank once again the organizers, René Lemoine Institute and AGIA, for putting all of this together. And I wish us all a beautiful event today and tomorrow. Enjoy the conference, and Catherine, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, first of all, thanks to all of the speakers, and as well you, Zeina, for the great moderation of the session. It was really a pleasure, very interesting and inspiring presentations. I'm very happy. And I'm part of the organizing team, and I just want to tell you that there are options for coffee and tea breaks at the moment. So you actually have the opportunity to get an exchange with RLI and AGIA network. They are both organizing initiatives and institutes behind it. And you will find these in the program as well. So you can just enter the coffee breaks or the tea breaks, and then you will find some more information about AGIA and RLI. And yeah, so with this, I hope you enjoy our virtual coffee breaks. Maybe you can prepare yourself a tea or coffee at home and then join us. And afterwards, we will start then at 11:30 with the island session, where James Elsmore will have a very interesting session with a lot of different island ambassadors from all over the world. I think that will be very inspiring as well. So thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Yeah. All right.